Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to teach you a simple secret which will help you to analyze chord progressions and create smooth connectivity across adjacent chords. This secret is the idea of the common tone, which is when we have one or more shared notes across a set of chord changes. So take for example a G major chord and a B minor chord. These two chords sound good together because there are notes that are shared across the two chords here. So a G chord is spelled as G, B, and D, and a B minor chord is spelled as B, D, and F sharp. So there are two notes that are shared across these two chords, and the idea of the common tone is that these shared notes are going to be what makes them sound good together. So common tones essentially will make chord changes, adjacent chord changes that is, sound smooth and connected. And in my opinion, I think this happens because it gives us a constant that we can listen to or track when the chord changes are happening. So with that being said, let's take a look at some examples of how we can use common tones to write some nice sounding chord changes. And also let's take a look at some examples of how we can use common tones to analyze a chord progression. All right, for this first segment, let's take a look at common tones in the context of diatonic music, or when we play in a single key. And let's look at the key of G major, which is spelled as G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. So we're going to get common tones when we create chord progressions that move by thirds, which can be inverted to sixths, and when we move by fifths, which can be inverted to fourths. So taking a look at that example that I did earlier, if we play the one chord in the key of G, which is spelled as G, B, and D, and we move up a third diatonically to B minor, then we're going to have some common tones here. So we're going to have two shared common tones, as I said before, in the form of the note B and the note D. So that's a nice smooth sound when we change between those chords. Another example would be this. We could start on A minor, and if we move up from A minor by a third to C, then we're going to have some common tones, again, in the form of a C and an E being shared across two chords. So when you move by thirds, you're going to have two shared notes in your chords, which sounds pretty nice. Now, let's say that we have another chord here. Let's say that I start on E minor. If I go down a third or go up a sixth from E minor, we're going to have the chord C. So this is, as you can probably tell, a very poppy sounding chord change here. So these two chords share two notes with each other. So we have that nice common tone relationship when we move by third or sixth there. Again, now when it comes to fourths and fifths, when we have movements that go by this type of interval, we're going to have one shared tone. So if I go from G to D, which is the one chord to the five chord, we have the shared common tone of this D note here. And that creates a nice and very common kind of poppy sound. Let's try another one. So if we go and play an A minor chord, if I go from A minor to E minor, we're going to get a shared E note, which again helps to create a little bit of that consistency across the two sounds. So if you're playing in a diatonic setting and you want to create some nice, easy pop chord changes, then try moving by thirds and by fifths. And by no means do you need to stick to just one of these. When you're creating a progression, you can kind of mix and match. And sometimes you can move by step two. But if you really want a nice sound that's going to precede your chord, then it's pretty much guaranteed that moving by a fifth or by a third is going to sound pretty good. So now let's take a look at an example of a chord progression that is pretty poppy, and let's analyze it to see how the changes work. So we're going to look at the chord progression used in the song All Star by the band Smash Mouth, because I'm in a meme mood this week. So we have G major, D major, A minor, and C. So all of these chord changes here are connected by common tones and these third or fifth ideas. So this first change goes from G to D, which is movement by fifth. So we have the shared common tone of this D here. And then we get another change moving down a fourth, which is another common tone relationship of the same kind here, where we have a shared note, this A. And then we get some movement by third to round off the progression. So then we go to an A minor chord and then a C major chord. So that's that common tone where we move by thirds. And that gives us two shared common sounds there. So yeah, if, as I said before, you want some nice simple moves, then try moving by thirds and try moving by fifths. Anyways, another trick that we can try in a diatonic setting is what I like to kind of think of as pivoting. So let's say we start with this like E minor 7 shell voicing chord here. So a really nice thing to do is take a note that you're going to pivot on. So in this case, I want to pivot on actually 2 notes. I want to pivot on this G note and this D note here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try moving the bass note around this chord here. And that's going to lead to some chord changes, but it's also going to lead to this really conjunct sound where I have a little bit of movement, but I have something that my ears can still track as I move through the changes. So we'll go like that. And so, as I'm sure you heard, we just had this sound ringing out as we essentially implied a kind of moving bass line across these sounds here. So to me, that's a really, really nice kind of sound. And we could do another example in a different key. So let's say we start with like an A major 7 chord. So I think I want to make this G sharp note here a constant across my changes. So we could go from this A major 7 to this G major chord, right? So our ears are still able to track this sound here. And we've got this like open ringing B now, so that's probably going to be pretty nice in some of this. And then we can move the bass note and get this F sharp minor 9 chord here. And so it's all being tied together by this note, and we're just kind of pivoting on that sound. So once again, we have some examples of pivoting. I could do another example in like the key of D, right? So we could do something like this. Now this is something that I've played before, and really the thing that drives this kind of progression is the common tones, or just the consistent sounds that you hear across these chord changes. And as a little side tangent, this is something that I think is pretty common when we play in alternate tunings, because when we play in alternate tunings, we usually have notes that are rung out almost constantly as we play chords. Take, for example, something in the tuning of like D, A, E, A, C sharp, and E. Like usually the upper tones, like C sharp and E, are going to ring out when we play our various chord shapes that involve open notes. So the common tone is kind of something that's being used in that kind of context, and it's not all too different from what I'm demonstrating right here. So again, that was the pivot point concept. Now, for a third idea, this pivot point concept is really powerful not only in a diatonic setting, but also in a chromatic setting. So let's say that we have this note here, E. So basically, I can create a series of chord changes. Like let's say we start with a D major 9. I can start creating a series of chord changes that all sound fairly conjunct together if I just pivot on this D note right here. So I could go to like, it's like D minor 9 chord, B minor 11 chord, a C7 over B flat, an A major 7 chord, a G13 chord, a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord. Like these chords have absolutely no relationship to each other in terms of keys, but they all sound fairly conjunct because we're just pivoting on a certain note. So this idea of the common tone is so powerful that it can draw chords that aren't even typically related to each other from a key standpoint, just based on the fact that we're tracking a single note here. So I find that when I encounter really weird chord changes in like musical analysis, common tones are usually the thing that glues it all together. Like take, for example, a chord progression where you have, again, this like a D major 9 chord. If we had like a major 7 chord that was like underneath it, like even here, there's some semblance to me of blend because we have a shared D note across these two pitches, which helps to create some sense of continuity across the sound. So whether we create continuity in a diatonic setting, pivoting on a note, or we do it in a chromatic setting, this common tone idea is so powerful that it will just make a lot of your chord changes work. So anyways, check out common tones, and I hope you guys have some fun writing some music with them. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.